when people are constantly stressed and having to work, and when housing costs are so high, right, you don't have time for community. There are ways that we can, and we have to build community better, and we have to be making neighborhoods that build community, and we have to be giving people space in their lives to build community.
But also just the observation that that you kind of made is, and that is, living with people is messy.
Yeah.
But I think the corollary to that is that it's worth it. You know, like
Yes.
being connected and feeling like you're part of something, it's totally worth the mess. And
I was hoping you would go there next, because that is
Yeah.
absolutely the other side.
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for episode 16, I spoke with Claudia Hanson Thiem over Zoom to discuss cohousing, cooperative housing, and car-light living. Claudia is a regular opinion writer for the Daily Camera, Boulder's local daily newspaper, but is on temporary hiatus from that work while she manages the campaign for city council candidate Nicole Speer. I admire Claudia for the way she shows up for housing justice in Boulder, and the way she articulates a clear and positive vision for building inclusive communities in our city. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Claudia Hanson Thiem.
Claudia, welcome to Sharing Boulder. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Philip. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. I always like to start off an episode by just having you introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about what you do for work, or in the housing space. Go ahead.
Sure. So I'm Claudia Hanson Thiem. I think a lot of people in Boulder know me through my opinion writing for the Daily Camera. And I have been involved with, I think, a really broad base of housing related advocacy, also land use and transportation here in Boulder. But really just in the last 3 years. I've lived in Boulder since 2007, when my spouse got a job at CU. And I was not really involved in local politics until what is known as the co-op wars, which unfolded in 2017. I happen to live in a co-housing community, which is a type of intentional community, somewhat shared living space. And I felt a real affinity with folks who were advocating for shared housing here in Boulder. And that was a rabbit hole that I have yet to climb back out of. It goes deeper and deeper. And so I have, on the side of being a stay-at-home parent for the last few years, been really digging into housing advocacy and all the rest here.
Well, that's great. It's no wonder our paths crossed, because, you know, I've just been trying to dive into this space too. I feel like I'm on a similar trajectory, because I moved into Boulder in 2007, and just kind of picking up, trying to figure out how I can be helpful in the housing space in the last few years. So that's very cool. Well, I definitely want to dive into the to the co-housing issue. And the co-op issue, and make sure we come away with this, from this episode, understanding the difference. But I wanted to highlight you also. I know you also from the Boulder Housing Network newsletter, and so
Yeah.
I assume it's okay to put a plug in for that.
Absolutely, yeah. I can share a little bit about that.
Great.
The Boulder Housing Network is a newsletter that was started by Macon Coles, who's a former member of the Boulder City Council. And he is very interested in getting more housing advocates involved in the early stages of housing reviews. Housing reviews take a very long time. The process in Boulder can be quite contentious, and it's much more common for people to show up in the public process to say no, or to work against housing, than it is for people to come out and share a positive message. So he is using some of his, expertise around the process as a former member of council, as a former member of planning board also, I believe, and trying to get people involved in those early stages of advocacy. I myself had been live tweeting Boulder Planning Board meetings on Twitter for the last year. And so we had a kind of natural affinity here. Me trying to raise awareness of what happens really in the bowels of the planning process here in the city.
Well, that's very cool. I get the newsletter, and so listeners, please sign up for the Boulder Housing Network newsletter. It's easy to sign up for. I don't remember how I signed up for it now, but I get it. You know, it seems like it's more than once a month, maybe every week, something like that.
It comes out in conjunction with major reviews of housing projects that go before planning board. So it's not a particularly regular publication schedule. Sometimes those things are happening week after week after week. Sometimes there's some gaps. It really depends on what the planning board and city council agendas are. So we're trying to cue people in when there's a big project actually coming up for some sort of public discussion.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it. It's a really great way to, you know, like these things don't naturally just percolate to the top of your Facebook feed or the information, you know, fire hose. And so having that newsletter is really useful. I personally, it's sort of one of these things that's nagging on my conscience because I haven't really taken action to show up at a planning board meeting yet and comment publicly, but it's on my radar of things to be thinking about. And I understand that it's important. So I really appreciate that you're doing that work.
It is. And I would also say, though, if we had an ideal set of policies here in the city of Boulder that were getting us good outcomes in the housing space, we wouldn't have to make this appeal so strongly for advocacy. It really is a commitment of time and energy to show up at public meetings, particularly if you have to do it over and over and over again for a single project. It really tends to favor people who have a lot of spare time, who are potentially retired, who don't have kids at home, you know, who work regular business hours as opposed to evenings. So there are a lot of barriers to participation. I mean, you shouldn't feel bad at all about not being able to do it. But that in and of itself is a problem with some of our housing policy here, is that it requires this kind of active intervention to keep things on track.
Well, I really appreciate, you know, it takes a village to move a lot of this stuff forward. So I really thank you for the hard work that you've been doing. And then also, again, with the Daily Camera and your opinion pieces, those are just wonderful. And I look forward to more. I understand you're taking a break from that now because
I am at the moment. Yeah, I'm spending this fall managing a city council campaign for Nicole Speer. And Nicole is everything I would ever want to see in a candidate, in a progressive candidate for council. She's a scientist. She has a mind for policy analysis. She also comes from a place of enormous compassion and empathy. She connects with people. She has been active in the NAACP. She does volunteer work for a local homeless outreach provider. So she's really tuned into communities that are not often represented in city politics. And I really jumped at the opportunity to work with her, but that does mean, yeah, stepping back from having a kind of privileged platform in the community. It's also plenty of work on its own.
How's the campaign going?
The campaign feels really positive to me at this point. It's great working for a candidate who really exudes a positive message.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying it.
I had the good pleasure of interviewing her earlier this summer, and I was just really struck by her presence. You know, like she's both very welcoming and warm, but also like she just commands respect, and she, you know, she's someone to take seriously, right? And I don't know, I just really admired the way that we navigated through lots of issues, and she kind of understands what she understands, and she seems like she would be a good person to seek expertise when she needs it, and I don't know. I just like you said, I think there's just so many great things about her as a candidate that it's hard not to be excited. So
You will hear no argument from me there.
yeah, great. Well, so some of the subjects that I wanted to talk with you about include co-housing and co-ops, but also I understand that you're a car light family. So I wanted to dive into that,
Yes.
but maybe it makes sense to talk about co-housing first to get a sense of where you live, and also just more generally how it's useful for pushing housing in forward in Boulder. So
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe tell us about Holiday and maybe more generally too what co-housing is.
Sure, absolutely. So my family and I live in a community called Wild Sage, which is located in North Boulder in the larger Holiday New Urbanist neighborhood. This entire area was developed around 2004, 2005. With, of course, a long planning process before it. And it was a conversion of a fairly large tract of land that was previously a drive-in movie theater into what was supposed to be a complete neighborhood here in North Boulder. And it's quite unique in that it integrated a very large amount of permanently affordable housing. So 40% of all of the housing up here is deed restricted affordable. The Holiday neighborhood was developed in smaller chunks, each by different developers, and one of those square blocks is the Wild Sage co-housing community. Co-housing is a neighborhood residential model that has origins in Denmark. I'm not an expert on the history of it, but the idea is that you have groups of people that come together to often design their own communities, set the rules for them. And then the community itself is also physically designed in a way to promote interaction between people. So the way that we have done this here at Wild Sage in Boulder, and I think is quite common in co-housing developments, are you have some shared spaces in the community. So we have a large shared lawn that we call the common green that most houses have quite immediate access to. We have a large building called the Common House, where we have some community facilities that we share. We have a large dining room and a commercial-sized kitchen. We have guest rooms that people in the community can use instead of having an extra room in their house. We have some meeting spaces. We have an exercise room. We have a shared laundry room. So we try to do some of these things together as a community. And what that means is that the homes themselves, even though they are complete homes, I mean, everyone has a standalone kitchen, you have all of your own facilities.
You don't share bathrooms and showers.
No, it's not communal living.
Yeah.
So everyone has a complete private home, but the homes tend to be much smaller than equivalent homes. Because we share a lot of these things. And a lot of people have a very small kind of outdoor space associated with their home. But again, we're sharing that main lawn. We're sharing a big patio on our common house. So a lot of these things that you often find attached to individual housing units, we're sharing as a community here.
That's wonderful. I love the sound of that, but I've actually had 2 conversations this week about HOAs. And one reaction that I have is, well, gosh, that sounds like HOA on steroids. I mean, like, so in one case, the conversation was about sort of cynically about HOAs as a way for neighbors to micromanage their neighbors, and maybe just speak to that. Is the HOA onerous, or do you feel like it's cooperative? How is it different than standard HOAs, which are mostly concerned with appearances, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, because since we have shared facilities and since we share walls, most of our buildings are townhouse structures here, we have to have some kind of legal entity, right?
Yeah.
To manage these things. And so we are incorporated as an HOA. I'm not sure how common that is for co-housing. That may vary by state. It may, vary by the community. But our model is an HOA. I think we're different from a lot of what people think of as HOAs in that we are really committed to self-governance. Okay, and so I think a lot of people think about the HOA as this thing that simply imposes rules, right?
Yeah, they send you
And
the warnings. They send you the approvals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what we really emphasize here is that we are the HOA, right? So there are
Yeah.
34 households here. Everyone is invited and expected on some level to attend monthly meetings. And we talk about what the priorities of this community are. So it's a much higher involvement situation. And that's an expectation when you become a member of a community like this. So yeah, it is that legal structure. We could, in theory, have the rules and regulations and the like, but the way the culture of this community is these things get discussed, and we do it ourselves. We're not delegating all of this to management companies and the like. So it's taking responsibility for your relationship to your neighbors.
Cool. So one of my questions about Holiday in particular, I don't have the Wild Sage block mapped out in my brain. I've just sort of ridden my bike over there, and I don't know much about it. I haven't spent much time there, but I understand that there was not a lot of parking built. It was, I think maybe you told me that it's 0.7 parking spots per unit or something
I am
like
not
that.
sure what the exact ratio is. I think it's closer to 1 per unit of off-street parking.
Oh, and it's off-street parking. So is there any on off-street parking? Yeah, right. And then there's the on-street parking.
Correct.
And because one thing I've noticed about biking through there is that there's a lot of cars parked on the street. So I actually feel a little claustrophobic when I bike through there because there's so many cars everywhere. And I wonder if that's just a function of the fact that I'm on the outside of the co-housing the shared space when I'm riding through the street. So like for example, the shared lawn that you have, is that accessible to the public, or would I normally bump in, wander into it by accident?
That's a good question. So yeah, you could wander through our community. There are connections to the city sidewalks on the outside. It does feel somewhat protected though. And this is a pretty standard design concept in co-housing, is that it's not necessarily a car-free way of living, but almost any co-housing community keeps cars on the outside. So we do have a couple of parking lots and we do have garages in our community, but they are all on the exterior of the community. And if you want to go to the center green, if you want to go to the common house, you are walking on pedways in the community. You are not walking through parking lots. And you are also generally not parking directly in front of your own home, right? And that's also part of the design of this community, is that even as you're coming in, you're parking your car, you are then walking through the community to get to your home, and you will see people, right? And that's, I think, part of building community, are these casual encounters that you have with folks.
Nice. Well, that's the, I want to live in a community that has just serendipity built into it, where you bump into your neighbors and you make new friends, and there's, meals happen or events happen kind of organically, that not everything has to be planned. So, well, cool. Thanks for sharing that. I'm always interested in other people's stories of, especially people with families who are trying to live with less cars. And so that was one thing that I heard that we had in common. We went on a long experiment where we went with no cars for a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
We do have a car now. But anyways, maybe just share a little bit about your transportation situation and the Hanson Thiem household.
Well, I mean, kudos to you for making it sometime without a car in Boulder with kids, because it's hard. I don't think it would be possible for us. I find it funny on some level that we are considered a car light family. So I have a spouse and I have 2 children in elementary school, and we have 1 car. That has always been the case. And yeah, we try to bike as much as we can. And that started a couple of years ago, just with me challenging myself to say, well, how much of this could we do without the car? My husband has always been a bike and bus commuter. He works at CU, which is 3 or 4 miles distant from us, but we're on the Skip and the 204 bus lines. So that's totally possible to do from up here. But it was a bit more of a challenge with me moving children around.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a commuter bike. Actually, now we each have one bicycle. We're also not cyclists, if you want to put that in quotes. We're not the people that have a garage full of bikes.
Yeah.
We don't have a garage, which is part of the
Wow.
problem there.
Yeah.
So we are doing what we can with utilitarian bikes. My kids both learned how to ride bicycles independently quite young, at age 4. They ride their bikes to school every day, weather permitting, and that's about a mile from us. And I take the bus and ride my bike to basically whatever meetings that I can get to, whatever obligations that I have in town. Again, within reason. I'm not a person who rides in snow and ice conditions on the roads. Also, if I need to go somewhere in South Boulder, that is a 40 to 45-minute bike ride for me. And sometimes time really does become an issue in those kinds of things. And then, of course, moving children around. If they can't do it themselves on their bikes, we do drive them.
Yeah.
We're up on a hill.
Do you have a spot for a passenger on the back of one of your bikes, or
I do not. No, we do not.
Yeah.
And when I bought a commuter bike, and it was the first nice bike I bought in my adult life 3 years ago, e-bikes were not as much of a thing. I think at that point, I think the adoption of e-bikes has grown massively.
Yeah, really.
Even in the last couple of years. And it wasn't really something on my radar screen. I see them around now and I'm like, oh my God, if only I had gotten the long tail, right?
Yeah.
To actually be able to put my kids on the back of it. But now they're getting old enough that wouldn't even make sense anymore, right? So my eldest is turning 10 soon. She can get around pretty well on her own, but of course it depends on things like street safety.
Yeah.
And overall distance. So yeah, the e-bike for the kids is probably, we're getting past that in our lives. So
well, I like having, we have a couple of e-bikes for the adults and in our family. And we do have spot for a passenger on the back of one of the bikes, a trailer hitch for hauling groceries and such. And yeah, I think, and then we just go more places further, right? So more than the kids do. So having the e-bikes is nice. Just as a plug, there's lots of different kits that you can get to retrofit your current commuter bike that you love. So you can think about that at some point, perhaps. But I appreciate your comment that you're not cyclists. It's kind of a funny thing for me because I've never done cycling as a sport, to just go somewhere for the recreation of it. Or I've done very little of that, that is to say. But because I've spent so much time on a bicycle, like everyone wants to give me bicycle themed swag, like a t-shirt or a mug or whatever. Like everyone associates me with bicycles, even though it's like, I don't give you a mug that has a car on it, but anyways.
Yeah, I've had the same experience actually. And I mean, I put cyclist in quotes there, of course, because I am a cyclist, right? I'm a transportation cyclist. But that's not something that, as you know, a lot of people don't really have a vocabulary for that or a good understanding of what biking for transportation is. That makes me sad. It's something I would like to change, but.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that there's these two worlds of cycling that are kind of very separate worlds. The people who are in their Lycra and trying to get as far and as fast as possible. And then there's the people who are replacing car trips, and those are kind of, they're two very different sets of people, I think, or sets of use cases. So
Yeah, they certainly can be.
well, one question I had before we leave this, have you had any close calls with your kids on bikes?
I'm trying to think here. And there has not been anything that has really like shocked me and made me feel like my God, that could have
Yeah,
gone
what if? Yeah.
south in a bad way. I think about it all the time. If you were to shadow me riding with my kids to and from school, you would hear in my voice and the way that I'm communicating with them constant vigilance, right?
Yeah,
We have to
yeah.
ride on 19th Street, which has portions of it has bike lanes, portions don't. It's a very direct route, but I'm constantly, stay on this side of the line. Don't come up next to that car. It might be turning. So just constantly riding them. My fourth grader, it drives her crazy. She's like, "Mommy, I know." But I'm with a first grader too, who doesn't have the kind of constant situational awareness.
Right.
And that's what I feel like the stress is, right? Is having to have that constant vigilance about what's happening around your kids.
Yeah, well, there's this aspect of trying to live your life on a bicycle, or as much of it as possible, where you feel like, I don't know if you feel this way, but I sometimes feel like an outsider, because everyone else is in cars. The world is normal when you're in cars. And there's this aspect of constant vigilance. And then there's also this aspect of just like, sometimes this is really inconvenient, like I'm just a crazy person for trying to make a difference in this small way, and really I had to just hop in the car and make this easy on myself. That's what everyone else is doing,
Okay. Yeah.
So.
I have a cussed streak where I really have committed to doing certain things, and I make rules for myself, right? There are certainly times when, yes, I will drive, but there's whole categories of things where I've said like, no, actually, I will not do this if I have to drive to do this thing.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of the mindfulness aspect of getting out of your car, because you don't have the luxury of just showing up. One of the things that's funny about driving in a car for me is that I'm always like, wow, this is like instantaneous transportation. I can go anywhere, and it's so fast. Which obviously, the world is built around this basic idea, but to me, it's like this kind of discovery every now and then. Where was I going with that? Oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. Well, just the mindfulness aspect of that. If you don't let yourself just drive yourself to wherever you think you might want to go, the next time something pops in your brain of, oh, I want to go somewhere, you plan out better the places you need to go to. You're kind of more mindful about the things that you buy and the things that you need to get done, and kind of stacking those things up in a way that doesn't just lend itself to like, okay, I just remembered I got to do this, hop in the car, go do it, and then come home. So I don't know if that's familiar to you.
Yeah. It leads you to be strategic. And I've also found like we make sacrifices, right? There are things that we don't do that I think we would do if I was more comfortable just driving everywhere. Like one thing that we've lost, I think, with the pandemic is I have not taken my kids on the bus since the pandemic started. And for a long time, I myself did not take the bus until I was, vaccinated and felt more comfortable about it. So that was our way of going downtown as a family. Again, I say I operate by these rules. And one of my rules has always been like, downtown is accessible by bus. It's not a place that there should be a lot of cars. And so I will not drive downtown. So what you see now in the pandemic is I don't have a way to get my kids downtown, right? So we don't hang out on Pearl Street. We don't go to the main library together anymore. I can do these things, right? I take my bike down there in the course of other things. We don't go to the farmer's market as a family unit. And that's wearing on me a lot. And I think that kind of exposes some of the gaps that we really have here. If you want to talk about really doing car light or car free living, is that if aspects of this chain break, like, yeah, you can't take the bus or the bus isn't doing it for you, you really have to drive to do certain things.
Well, I totally appreciate that because I really miss riding the bus with my kids. One of the things that I've observed frequently is that when you drive your kids somewhere in a car, it's often it takes on this dynamic of me versus them, and the maybe like a not combative, but just sort of like contrarian somehow. And when you're on the bus, it's sort of like, we're all in this together. We're doing this, like
Yeah.
it's us against the world, more like, instead of me versus them. And I don't know. I feel like a great parent when I'm on the bus with my kids. You're just sitting there with with a kid on either side or whatever, and just feeling like I'm in the world with them instead of driving them through it. I don't know.
I really feel that. There's a sense of togetherness. I think they think of themselves more as being in public, right? Which
Yep.
they're not in the car, right? Like
That's
any
right.
petty family thing can go very easily from the front door into the car and continue on to wherever you're going.
Yeah.
It's a stressful situation anyway. Get in your seat, pull yourself in, keep your hands off your sister, right? But
Absolutely.
yeah, those dynamics really disappear when you're moving around on public transportation.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing all that with me. That was fun. I kind of do you have anything else you want to say about car light living, or and again, I know it's car light is maybe in double quotes there, but anyways, I admire you for tackling that as a goal for your family, and hopefully we can talk more families into getting on their bikes to get places. So
Yeah. I think if people see that it's a spectrum, it's not an either or thing. I think
yeah.
that is a way to appeal to a lot of folks.
What I wanted to hear about next is the co-ops. So I understand you're part of another organization. How many organizations are you? Do you have a hand in? You just show up everywhere. But
I'm trying to extract myself from things, but yes.
So
I'm on the board of the. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Boulder Housing Coalition. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yes, I'm on the board of the Boulder Housing Coalition. Boulder Housing Coalition is a 501c3 organization that owns and manages cooperative houses in Boulder. We have 4 of them at the moment, and have since I joined the board 3 years ago. And yeah, we house about 65 people at any given time across these 4 houses. The vast majority of folks living in those houses are lower income, and we actually are part of the city's affordable housing program. So we would say the beds in those co-ops are deed restricted in a sense, like they come with income limits and asset limits. In the same way that many of the other housing options in the city's affordable program.
So you said 4 houses with 65 people in them. So that's
approximately,
15, 16 people per house. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have 3 houses that have around a dozen people, and then we have a larger co-op, the Ostara co-op, which is allowed to have up to 26 people, I believe. It's actually an old apartment building that we purchased and remodeled to become a co-op.
And how did you purchase the building?
I was not involved in that. Okay. So the BHC, when it has expanded in the past, it does receive some money through the city affordable housing program.
I see.
So the city then get out at some point in time to create affordable housing, and we are a recipient of those sources. But we are also carrying mortgages on all of our 4 houses. And since we are not private individuals in the real estate market, we are actually getting commercial loans for those properties. So we pay higher interest rate than folks who are living in single family homes. We do not get 30-year fixed rate amortization on our loans. So that is an expense in that affordable housing space, that we don't have really solid low interest sources of funding. The city funds are great. They tend to get us in the door with projects, but to sustain these things, we actually do have to compete in that commercial loan market.
And then you kind of have to, I assume, to make it self-sustaining, the rents have to cover the mortgage as best as you can, and then you fill in the gaps. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a fairly narrow band of incomes that we can then accommodate in these houses, because our deed restrictions with the city say that, you know, we are going to be housing primarily folks who are below 50% area median income, for example. So there's a limit on how much you can charge those folks. And at the same time, yeah, we have to pay the bills on the houses. So there's the mortgage, there's the utilities, there's some management overhead that goes with it, and also trying to build some capital reserves so that we can actually maintain these buildings in the future.
So then the building that was formerly an apartment building, I kind of assumed that has all the parking it needs, and there's less cooperative living in the sense that people just have their own units. Is that fair to say?
No, the design is still somewhat communal. I believe there's only 6 off-street parking spaces on that site that's grandfathered in.
Okay.
And the building itself was remodeled in a way that it connected many of the former units. So they're kind of little pods on the inside where there might be, you know, a small common room with bedrooms adjacent to it. But it is still a shared living room, a shared kitchen, shared dining room. And then there's 2 small apartments that have, I believe, separate entrances in that building. And that's to accommodate, you know, larger households, families who may want to be part of this cooperative living structure, but who also want a little more privacy.
Cool. So yeah, I was curious about, you know, some of these. So I assume that the other houses look from the street like a large single family home.
Yes.
And then, but then if there's 10 to 12, mostly adults living in the house, perhaps there's some children living there too.
It varies from year to year, yeah, but mostly adults, yeah.
Yeah. Do they all have cars? Are there 10 to 12 cars parked outside on the street, or how does that work?
Yeah, that varies from house to house. And a lot of that has to do with where in the city these houses are located, what the local connectivity is, and even what some of the city rules around parking are. So our houses are in very distinct neighborhoods. If you want to talk about parking and transportation situations, the Chrysalis Co-op is just a block and a half off of Pearl Street downtown. And there are not parking restrictions in that situation, but it's pretty clear to anybody who wants to be living down there that you are competing for a very limited amount of on-street parking if you want to have a vehicle.
Yeah.
Folks there also have eco passes, and they have very good walking access to downtown and to CU. So it's my impression that not a lot of folks have cars.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
You take another example. Our newest house, called Mango Manor, is down in Martin Acres, and fairly far south in Martin Acres. That is not an area where people have eco passes. And it's got bus service, but it's somewhat limited. And that house was also created under the city's co-op ordinance, which required us as an organization to have a transportation demand management program. And we were limited in the number of on-street parking spaces that our residents would be allowed to use. And so we actually have to screen folks applying for membership in that house to see if they are bringing a private car with them, because there's a limited number of slots that we can actually have in the house.
And so then is there a formal car share, or is it just sort of like, here's the cars at the house, or like, how does that all work?
Yeah, so residents can actually work that out themselves if they want to. use each other's cars. I believe there is a car share car that is parked
Close by.
at or near the Mango Manor Co-op. And our co-op members do get membership to the car share program. That is part of one of the benefits actually of co-op membership. So we do try to create some structures and access to shared transportation.
Well, that's super interesting to me. I've never experienced a cooperative living arrangement, and but I'm interested to know more about it. Do you see this as so I understand that this got reformed, quote unquote, a few years ago, and also I understand that it didn't do a lot to make it easier to have these cooperative living arrangements. And so can you maybe just give me the landscape of what's going on in this space and what changes need to happen so that more people have opportunities like this?
Sure. I don't know the old cooperative ordinance particularly well, to be honest, but there was a cooperative ordinance in place in Boulder for several decades, I believe, that kind of outlined what are the requirements to be a co-op. And it resulted in essentially 0 co-ops ever being created. It was quite difficult to do. That law was rewritten in 2017. It is still very difficult to create a housing cooperative. The entire premise of why would you even need this policy is that Boulder has quite restrictive occupancy limits on most homes, and co-ops exceed that essentially. To have a viable co-op, in most cases, you're talking about 6 or more people living together. City of Boulder, even in high density zones, it limits your occupancy to 4 people. And in most zones, it's actually 3 people unrelated. So that was the logic for even having a co-op ordinance, to give some number of people the opportunity to basically share at a higher level. But of course, residents, there was a lot of pushback saying, well, we don't want just anybody sharing houses, right? I think there's a lot of fear in town of student rentals being, overoccupied and the like. But that's something that the folks who crafted the co-op ordinance, they wanted to limit, right? So the whole discussion was about, well, how do you know if something is a legitimate co-op, whatever a legitimate co-op is, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the co-op ordinance has to do with determining if you're a legitimate group of people. So it requires people who want to have a co-op to form some sort of a legal entity, such as an LLC, to be sharing bank accounts. It requires a lot of applications and reviews of the property that you want to occupy. Is it actually suitable safety-wise for the number of people you want to have there? Do you have a transportation demand plan to make sure that not all the residents are parking cars there? Do you have a contract with a trash hauler? A lot of these things that I think they came out of people being worried about nuisance properties, and they decided to say, we're going to regulate co-ops in this way. So the co-ops have to go through an application process every 2 years. They have to get that renewed. And it's an extensive process to get certified as a legitimate co-op. You also have to have the approval of an expert cooperative housing organization, of which the BHC is one. But if you were just a group of friends who wanted to form a co-op, you would have to get some external group to validate you, to say, yes, we've vetted these people, we've done some training with them, they are a legitimate co-op. So that's one side of starting a co-op. The other side is finding the money and the property to do it. And that is also difficult.
Well, it's funny. It seems like it's hard enough to get 1 or 2 people to live with you peacefully, in a productive collaboration, So, I can see that the challenge of having 10 to 12 people plus all the bureaucratic layers. It seems like a pretty onerous. So I guess
it's a hard thing to start. I would say once you establish it,
right.
That group is not turning over fully all the time, right? You have some continuity in it. You have, a set of rules and expectations and bylaws that people who subsequently move in are subject to. But the startup is really, really intense. And if you couple that with having to navigate the Boulder real estate market, you start to understand really quickly why we have not had new co-ops forming.
Well, I'm curious to know if bedrooms are for people passes, if this makes it easier or harder for co-ops.
Yeah, we've had some informal discussion about that, and I still feel like they're somewhat different entities.
Yeah.
So bedrooms are for people, I think, is a very modest reform that really deals still with fairly small groups of people, right?
Yep.
I mean,
maybe 5, maybe 6, but
maybe 5,
usually
maybe
4
6.
or 5. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So not significantly different from the legal roommate situations that people already have. A co-op can be a different beast because there really is there's a longevity to it. Okay. It's an institution. It's not just a one-off collaboration of people often. And there's often a commitment to doing much more as a group, as a collective. And so it is a fairly intense form of living. And yet there's people that excel at it. There's people that really want to learn that way of living. And the houses that we have, like there is a minimum number of people to really have a functioning sharing system, right? If you want to talk about sharing labor in the house, really spreading costs out over people, having a good community culture that sustains itself. Doing that 4 or 5 people together that bedrooms would allow doesn't really get you to the level of the kind of social cooperative that we are working with.
Well, that makes me think of I don't know if this is a comment or a question. You may not be able to speak to this, but I would just, just on the face of it, I would think that if you live in a co-op, you have to be a really pro-social person who knows who's thought carefully about how to get along and how to be in community. And if you live by yourself, you can have all kinds of little habits that would grate on others that nobody cares because you're by yourself. But I assume that people who live in co-ops must be the friendliest people you could meet. Is that true?
Is it true? I mean, I should say, there's conflict everywhere, Philip. You don't get away with that. You don't get away from that, even in very pro-social groups of people. It is hard to live together. But you and I know that living with
kids,
with traditional families, right? Conflict is a very human thing. Certainly folks come in with the intention of living cooperatively, go along, get along kinds of things. Houses definitely struggle though with what are the real expectations, where do boundaries lie? How do you deal with minor disagreements? And, the BHC as an organization puts a fair amount of resources into helping people learn these kinds of skills, right? Because we, like in American society, a lot of people just do not have these sorts of skills. This is not the way we were raised. It's not the kind of community that most of us grew up in. And so people have great intentions of trying it, but they don't necessarily know in advance, well, how's this actually going to work out? So we do training of peer mediators in our system. We have a series of trainings every fall having to do with things like anti-oppression, nonviolent communication. So all sorts of these things that you actually need to really intensively live with people. It's not like we just put people in a house and say, oh you're mellow people, you know how to do this, right? And I think on some level, like a lot of us would be better off having these kinds of trainings, right? Like, I feel like even, a lot of our residents, no, they're not going to spend their entire lives living in shared housing situations, but they're actually getting skills there that are extremely useful for navigating this question of how do we share, right?
Yeah. Well, I've often joked that no one irritates you like the people you live with. And moving in with new people won't change that. It could help in some
Yeah.
situations, but
Um, we have plenty of conflicts in co-housing as well, even though we can, in Wild Sage, we can retreat to the privacy of our own homes, right?
Yeah.
Like I have my own door and I can close it and I can pull the curtains and I don't have to talk to my neighbors if I don't want to. Today, yes. We still have conflict. Sometimes it really sucks. It is hard, but it is such a overall supportive place to live and way of living, to know that you are surrounded with people who know you, right? They know that you're there. They see you. They are available. And that has really come out for me in the pandemic, right? Because there was especially this time earlier in the pandemic when we really were, a lot of us really were isolated, right? Like everything was closed. You're working from home. Your kids can't go to school. Businesses aren't open. It was still spring, like we had snowstorms, right? And so you could really feel shut in. And here I could go out on my porch and I could look out and say, oh, there's my neighbor walking their dog. Let me say hello, right? Or people that would be checking in. We were checking in on each other, folks who were living alone. Like, how can we help? People, we have an email list, and somebody's like, I'm going to the store, my God, it's scary, right? I'm going to go to the store. Can I bring things back for people, right? So there's these networks, and they happen because we see each other on a regular basis. I think that's really the key to it, is that you have this kind of constant drip of casual interactions with the same people over and over again, right? So they're familiar, even if you don't know everything about their past, even if you don't know all the gossip in their lives currently. You see them on the sidewalk every other day, and you say hi.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, I love people, and I want to think of it. I want to have a city where people feel connected and feel included and feel like they have that kind of resilience that you just described, where people we do favors for each other, or we help in a crisis or whatever. And I really admire you as a pro housing advocate, that you also have this kind of realistic sense about what it takes to have community, and you can't just put structures together and assume that a community will just take root.
No, but you're getting at something really important. I think in housing politics, we in Boulder in particular, we're focused a lot on like, let's get it built, right? Like that's the hurdle. That's the hurdle we have to get through. Get this thing approved, right? And I think that is extremely important. And we are in a situation where we have to do that. But if we can get beyond that moment of like emergency to say, there are ways that we can, and we have to build community better. And we have to be making neighborhoods that build community. And we have to be giving people space in their lives to build community, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's another thing we notice here, right? When people are constantly stressed and having to work, and when housing costs are so high, right? You don't have time for community.
No.
Right. If you are stressed just by like trying to survive in Boulder, if you have stretched to get your housing, you don't have time to do this stuff. And so that's another side of this entirely that goes way beyond even just like how you design neighborhoods. It's how you actually support people in having balanced lives.
That sounds like a great closer to me. That really, kind of summed a lot of things up. But I do want to just give you an opportunity to. Is there any other parting shots that you have that you thought about that you'd like to bring up?
Just say like a common thread on all of these topics that we've talked about, I think, is this idea that somehow, people like you and I, Philip, we talked about like feeling on the outside of things, like, oh, this isn't what normal people do, right? We're these weirdos, right? Biking around. I'm the weirdo living in an intentional community. I consider myself actually to be a pretty normal person. And I'm putting all
Yeah.
these things in quotes. But my theory about things like community living, especially the way that I'm living it, is that there are so many people that could do this, that would thrive doing this if it was more available to them. This is my operative theory about co-housing, because I never set out to join an intentional community. There are people that set out to do that, right? And they make it their mission, like, I'm going to find a community that I fit in. I am somebody who shares, who does intentional community. That was never me. That was never my husband. Folks just looking for a place to live in Boulder, and we found this. And I think it works. And people that we talk to who have never seen themselves in this space, when you explain to them how good it can be, how supportive it can be,
they're like, hey, how do I sign up?
Yeah, exactly. But it's hard to do, right? Because we make it hard to create these kinds of communities. But that is my theory. Maybe that's just me trying to, make myself feel good and like I fit in. But that if we had more of this, more people would be like, yeah, of course this is what we need. And more people can do it.
I love that, and I can't help but just contrast what you just said with the promise of suburbia, which has been such a lie, that you're going to have this perfectly ordered life in a nuclear family with your own property and your own space, and it's all yours, and I know I'm being kind of giving it a bad angle, but we really have a problem with our mental health and the sense of isolation and disconnection. And I just really believe firmly that we need to figure out how to live in ways that are just way more connected and communal. And that Amen. We have, when I think about what the purpose of our economy is, I think we have so much room for growth in the mental health sector, and in the building great places sector. And I think between those two things, if we can focus on well-being and providing great places to live, from that sense, I think we can have optimistic economic projections. I think this whole notion we're going to burn it all down to keep the current economic engine going is racing to the cliff. So
yeah, it's disappointing.
for sure. I kind of started a new angle at the end of this conversation, but hey,
we'll
Claudia,
just have to do this again sometime,
yeah, exactly. Right? Claudia, thank you so much for taking time, and I really appreciate your perspective on co-housing and cooperative housing and car light living. That was really great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philip.
This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced by David Adamson and Philip Ogren. Sound and video editing was done by Philip Ogren. The intro music was sampled from Osladum by Gilberto Gil and is available for use under the Creative Commons Sampling Plus license. Please visit us at sharingboulder.us for show notes and previous episodes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please support us by sharing this episode with your friends and family. Keep sharing, Boulder.